Welcome to the Future of Israel. I am B.J. Harvey, your host, and I brought two lovely people, Lou Pesco. Thank you for coming, Lou.
Thank you.
And Tom McGuire. Tom, my pleasure. And I thought maybe this week, after we finished all the Old Testament, the Jewish book, and we got into the New Testament called Matthew. The first book of Matthew is very challenging. We started to talk about chapter 1, is the genealogy, chapter 2 and chapter 3, and now we're in chapter 5, through the genealogy into his work. His work is the Messiah's work. And we still left off in chapter 5 and verse 17. So we'll ask Lou to start reading just this chapter, or just this verse 17. It's up to you, Lou.
This portion of the Sermon on the Mount goes into some critical areas of our lives. It goes into the descriptions of fulfilling the law, fulfilling what the prophets used to say. It blends into sacrifice, lust, adultery, divorce, a lot of the things that single out the humanity in us, where we could literally say we could accumulate failures in. The thing that strikes me is this. We can literally connect the Messiah still to the Old Testament and to the Old Law, even through the Sermon on the Mount, even through everything that he's previously said in the beginning of the verses in this chapter. Verse 17 begins as this: "Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of these least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." Let's stop there for a second and let's examine this. If I were to look at this portion of the passages, here would be my interpretation, and I'm sure you would get a different interpretation and Tom would get something completely different. The Messiah came, fulfilled the law, fulfilled a portion of the Old Testament law, which the scribes and the Pharisees, which he recently stated here, were to constantly fulfill. But he gives us a little bit of a glimpse to say, if you don't teach them the law, then you're the least of all humanity that I've created. But if you teach them always, you'll be called great. Mm-hmm. So to me, the law was always the origin. But the law to me also seems to be as a fence that kept everything at bay. If I were to come to you and say, I've got a set of statutes that I want you to follow, and there's 10 of them, you'd probably look at them and say, okay, I could probably do this, but you would probably feel as if you were corralled in, almost like a horse inside a corral. You were gated. But God forbid you broke one, you would probably humiliate your own self because you only broke one, even though I gave you 10. Tom, what do you think about this?
Well, it goes into so many things come to my mind, and and the funny part of it is a Mel Brooks movie when he came down and he said, I have 12 commandments, and then he dropped it and he went, 10.
10.
So there might have been more according to Mel Brooks, I'm not sure. It goes into when the Messiah came, and it says in here, I didn't come to abolish the law. So all the laws are still in place, and they're good. And the Messiah came and said, I didn't give you the laws to keep because it's impossible for you to keep them. I gave you the laws to show you you needed somebody that would come to be a sacrifice to get you back in a relationship with your father, with Dad. And that's really what we're talking about, is a relationship with God the Father. And what breaks that is sin. And the only thing that could bring us back to that is to have that sin go away. If you have children and they do something, you know, if they did something and you know about it maybe and they don't know, you could just feel it in a relationship. There's something wrong. There's you know that there's a strain in that.
Right.
Well, that's technically called sin. And when that gets taken away, then the relationship comes back between the two people. And the other thing that I'm looking ahead of here, and I throw this out as a question too. It says, for I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you'll certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, that's an impossibility to me when I read that. It's saying, I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, that's impossible to surpass that. So what he's saying in here is, again, leading to the fact that there had to be a Messiah that was going to come, a Savior, to come and save the people. Because in the Pharisees, if you study and you know about them, you know, they had they supposedly had everything right, but you can't do it by by being perfect. And that's when he said, you can't be perfect. I'm gonna make you perfect, and I'm gonna take that sin. Just like in the Old Testament, they had to have a blood sacrifice. You know, to me this is so simple, because they always had to have, when there was sin, they had to have an animal and slay the animal. Get a perfect lamb without spot, without blemish, sacrifice the blood, sacrifice that on the animal, and then you were made right, and then your sins were forgiven. And when the Messiah came, he says, I'm the perfect lamb. And my blood is shed. And it ties directly in. And you know, I go back to saying, please read. Take a year and read it for 15 minutes a day and see what it says.
I say the same thing.
You know, just in it, you know, and then it ties right in. But you know, it's adultery, and he talks about that. Mm-hmm. If you love somebody, you have, you know, friends, and you know, especially we're younger, not so much now, but somebody's having an affair, they're cheating, they're married. What he's telling us to do is for our own benefit. It's not to not have fun. It's because there's going to be a train wreck in back of you. And I've lived long enough, and I've made a ton of mistakes, and I messed up a lot, and nothing good ever came out of it. It hurt me, it hurt people, it hurt my family. So what is he telling us that people want to not have anything to do with? He's telling us that this is going to be bad for you. Don't kill somebody. You know, going into prison, I talk to people that kill somebody, it haunts them the rest of their lives. It's not over when you take somebody's life. That never goes away. And if you end up cheating or breaking the law, he told us not to do that because of the consequences of that. And anybody out there watching this knows it doesn't work out. So why would you not want to know about this? Why would you not want help to try and walk in a righteous, holy life? Because it's for our benefit and mankind's benefit. This isn't just for us, because we're all connected.
Brings to point, when I grew up in Norwalk, there was one of our neighbors, and we would go to her periodically and kiss her and say, you know, I love you. And she would say, I love you back. And as she got older, a little bit of her tune would change. One time I went to go do that, and I kissed her. I said, I love you. She goes, I love you too. What do you want? So as she said, what do you want? I was taken back to say, I never got that before. What do I want? What am I looking for? So this portion to me, when we focus on the law and the old laws, it always seems to point that we're always looking for something, but we're never able to attain it because we're always living in our fleshly attire. We're never going to reach perfection until we see the heavens and the Messiah accepts us complete and we get transfigured. But that older woman was always, she never said that until she was probably close to passing away. And then all of a sudden comes out, what do you want? And it struck me as to say, what do I want? It made you really think. To me, as the Messiah is talking here, I literally get that impression again. As he continues in the scriptures, first reconciliation and then sacrifice. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. As he goes into this portion, bouncing off the righteousness for us, trying to meet with the scribes and the Pharisees, he now goes into another portion to say, look, you can't murder because of the horrors, as you've mentioned earlier. The amount of horrors that we've never seen will not only captivate our minds, but it will also tarnish our spirit and destroy our souls because of the penalty of that sin. But what's even fascinating is that every portion of these passages always revert back to the Old Testament. I had a list here that I was going back and forth on. You had some portions go back into Exodus where it said, you shall not murder. Deuteronomy, you shall not murder. Exodus, you shall not commit adultery. Deuteronomy again, you shall not commit adultery. And it goes into even the marriage covenant. And as Tom was talking about it with the marriage covenant, there always seems to be the penalty. The penalty at that time, I think we also have to look deeply into the culture at that time. Look how we have it today. We've got a culture where so many marry for several years, they divorce immediately, and the ink isn't dry yet on their divorce certificate. Right away, they've got someone else. And meanwhile, we as outsiders say, are you sure about this? This is almost like a rebound relationship. This might not work. Give it time. So here we are as outsiders giving them legal counsel, just like the Messiah here is giving them legal counsel of not to do this, and they're just continuing to do that. How could we import this next portion into our modern timeline so it's got the same impact and punch as it did back when the Messiah was on earth? How could we do this now to say, look, I can give you this knowledge because I've got the 20/20 hindsight of what it can do to you and what it can do against you. But how can I literally tell you not to do it so you'll absorb it to prevent you from doing it? All of us know curiosity is deep embedded in all of us. So the portion of curiosity connected to the sin is what leads us down that road. I really think sometimes that when the Messiah was talking about this, he literally knew how the devil twisted sin into the attributes of human beings. And here's why I say that. The Messiah talks about murder. Some of the murderers out there, they become addicted to it. So now the sin of murder is embedded into their persona. They literally get a high from it. Now, here we are talking, we're talking about a really horrific sin. How can someone receive a high from the crime of murder? I really feel deep down that when the Messiah knew the devil took sin and distorted it so much, and embedded it into the attributes of flesh, into our DNA. To give you another example, I know I'm running off of a lateral here. When a runner runs a marathon and the endorphins kick in, they get that high feeling because they run for a long period of time. I really think that this is what the Messiah is talking about here. Deep down, the endorphins of a person getting high from the sin will literally captivate them to continue to sin. Just like a runner, after a while, does a marathon, they're running 5 miles, 10 miles, 15 miles. The endorphins kick in, and all of a sudden they've got the high. They can't just stop immediately. They've got to run probably another mile to cool down and slow down.
See, that's the seared conscience that they call it. And, everybody has a conscience when they say, I don't believe in God or whatever. He gave us all a conscience to look up into the heavens and the sky and look at that. And you have a seared conscience. The first time you do something, you feel uncomfortable. And then the second time you do it, it's a little easier, and the third time it's a little easier, which goes into what you're talking about.
Right.
And then it becomes, somewhat normal. Usually people in a lot of circumstances is they would get high from something which dulls your spirit.
Right.
It's either, drugs or alcohol or something like that, because people would do things when they got high that they wouldn't do if they were not high.
Mm-hmm.
And the story about David and Bathsheba was a great story about what, when her husband went away, and David called her over. She was on the rooftop. Don't know the story, and he called her over, and they ended up having sexual relations, and she got pregnant. So he called her husband back, and he said, well, he's going to come home from the war. He was fighting in the war. He'll come home. They'll probably sleep with each other, and then I'll be off the hook, and they'll just think it's his kids. So he comes back, and he says, he's sitting out in the front yard or on the street, and he says, I'm not going to do that. How could I do that when my men are out fighting, and I'm going to go, and I'm not going to do that? So David says, I'm going to have him over for dinner. I'm going to get him drunk, because if he gets drunk, he's surely going to go home and sleep with her. And to me, that's a great, great story about what happens when you get high. Because you'll do things that, now this guy had so much character that he still didn't even do it. But it's written, and he said he's going to, I know he's going to, if I get him high, he's going to go back. And, how many things, I don't know who, I drank and did things, but I would do things that I wouldn't be able to do if I was not under the influence of something. And that's a lot of times, if people aren't high when they do something, they're looking to do something, to get drugs, to get high. But the key to this, to me, is we talk about all these things, but the biggest picture of this is there's forgiveness for whatever we do.
Right.
And that's what is in here. That's what the Messiah came for. He knows we're all going to mess up. We're all going to sin. We're going to do bad stuff. And he made a way to get us right again. And he had this planned out, because he knew when he gave us a free will that we were going to do things that we didn't want to do. And we were going to break the law, and we were going to sin.
Well, let me ask you a question, Tom. The manipulation, I guess that is a good phrase, of David to get Uriah back, to get Uriah drunk, to get Uriah, it was a manipulation of another human being. Mm-hmm. Where was God then? On the other side, constantly, David was punished for doing what he did by taking his kid and making it die.
Yeah.
So he did pay the price, only he didn't pay the price, somebody else paid the price. The same somebody else, that's the Messiah, paid the price for us.
Right.
So I understand, but it all started with manipulation of David.
It all starts with covering up. When we mess up, we want to cover it up. It goes back to Adam and Eve.
It goes back to what happened in Washington. Same kind of messing up.
Everything is we got to cover whatever we're trying to cover our tracks. It goes on whatever any, it's like the woman you gave me. It goes back
Right.
to Adam and Eve. It's like, well, why'd you do this? Well, the woman you gave me, and so I get off the hook because I could blame somebody else for what I do. And the body is all a mess. We are all a mess. We're all broken. We all screw up. And if people could come to that and say, you know what, I can't do this myself. I am incapable of living a life without hurting myself and hurting other people. And they want to get on their knees and cry out to God as they know Him and say, help me. I need help because I can't do it, because I don't know anybody. They could cover it up for a while, and you could buy your cars, and you could get your houses and get your planes or your yachts and all that stuff. And we had boats together, and I had motorcycles, and we did a whole bunch of stuff, and nothing ever satisfies. It all leaves you shallow. And then you get older, and you go, what the old joke
yeah.
about you never see the U-Haul following the hearse. I worked with a guy. We worked at a gas station, new car dealership, and they used to have a funeral go by, and he used to say, Tommy, that's the last guy to let you down. Because they put you in the grave and they'd let the casket down. Tommy, that's the last guy to let you down. And and you get older and you look back and you go, and I was a lot dumber then than I am now.
Oh, sure, wisdom gives you...
And age, and you start to realize things, and then you wish you could just talk to the people that are younger that don't know and say, listen, I've lived it, I know it. There isn't anything out there. BMWs, Mercedes, Harleys, sex, drugs, rock and roll, it all is fleeting, it all doesn't work, and it all leaves a train wreck in back of you.
Well, how do you get that Messiah inside the heart? What an operation that is. How do you get the Jewish people to understand that there is such a thing as the Messiah?
That's why we're here. That's why we're here talking, to say at least research it. I go back to, and I didn't bring it, I was going to bring my consumer report. They'll look up everything except eternal life or God or heaven or hell. I just listening again to 1741 in Enfield, Connecticut, sinners in the hands of an angry God. And nobody mentions hell anymore. It's
Nobody?
Not many people talk about it. It's politically incorrect. And, and again, what's the price that's going to pay for your sin? It's got to be paid. And it's either Messiah's going to pick up the tab for you, or you're going to spend eternity in hell. And nobody wants to talk about that. In 1741, they were so scared when Jonathan Edwards preached that in Enfield, Connecticut, that they were hanging on the tree stumps, they were hanging on the pews because they were so scared. There was a reverent fear that they were going to slip into hell. And it's funny, in 1741, they were talking about the same things. He says, you think because you exercise and you eat right and you do all these things that you're somehow going to miss dying? People don't realize that everybody knows they're going to die. They just don't believe it.
Yeah, not right now, and not me.
Yeah, it's always going to be, and I'll figure it out later, and I'll have, so to have an awakening, I think, is what you call it. It's like, wake up. This life is going to be over. This life is short. My parents used to always say, it's going to go by fast. And yeah, you're sure.
Right.
And then you're sitting there going, what happened? Billy Crystal, what happened to my 20s? What happened to my 30s? What happened to my 40s? Boom, it's all gone. And, it's like, wow. So to search out, this is so much fun. This is so much fun, and it's fulfilling, and it leaves you with more than, there's nothing out there that gives you what the Lord can give you. And His love, His grace,
Keep on telling our
His
Jewish
mercy. It's over. You get a new car, it lasts you a couple of weeks, and then everything gets old. You get some new clothes, and then you got to keep doing it. It's insatiable appetite. But insatiable for eternity.
Right. Very few people have it.
Yeah, and that's what I guess that's what we really want to do. What I want to do is to say something or do something that gets people to put down Consumer Report, pick up the Bible, and read it for a year, and then make their conclusions without just coming off what they think they know or something off the cuff or somebody that a relative or something that's cultural, that they would actually say, you know what, I got to find out for myself if you guys are full of it or not, or you're saying something that's truthful.
Well, why don't you go through your shtick of saying reports? I love that the last time.
I was going to go back in the house and get the Consumer Report, but you know, and it's, you know, again, I was sharing this Saturday morning at a men's group, and the guy was looking up, he's buying a new toilet, he's got Consumer Report. You're getting a new phone, you have Consumer Report. You're looking at a car, getting Consumer Report. I was looking up cars that have CDs and navigations, because CDs they're not putting them in the cars anymore. You don't go to Consumer Report, you want to find it out. But if you want to find out if there's a God, did he have a son? Is it a Messiah? Is it what? How many questions do you have? Pick up the Bible, have the New Living Translation, the one-year Bible, and read it for a year. It takes 15 minutes a day. You could buy it for about $15 from Amazon and read it. And then have a conversation with people and talk about it.
The funniest thing, let me say this to you. Why don't you retitle that book and say Consumer Report Bible? That would be terrific.
I think there'd be a lawsuit over that one. I don't think I'd get away with that.
But that would be funny and probably get into their homes. So they have one on the table.
You know, and usually it's when somebody goes through something. There's sickness, there's cancer, there's something that comes up, there's a tragedy. And 9/11, everybody was back in the churches and the synagogues. It lasted about 2 weeks. And I hope it doesn't take another tragedy as something that's going to happen that's going to have to wake the people up, because we've gotten too lazy.
You also said something else in one of our shows that I'd like you to share with Lou, and that is, because you're Jewish, what makes you think you're going to go to heaven? Because you're Jewish? That's the only reason? What else is there another reason?
Yeah, well, that's what I said to you, because I had friends and I said, I'm not Jewish, so I'm not going to heaven, so I'm screwed.
Right.
So God made people that are going to go to heaven and people that are not going to go to heaven. That's not a God. That's not God. He made it for everybody to have an opportunity.
Is that why? Then I didn't know how to answer you. But then I found out that Paul said, you're grafted in to a family.
Yep.
And that's how you and I became brothers.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. You too can have the same possibility as we do, as brothers. Because Tom and Lou want to be brothers of yours. Tell them, Lou, how you would like to be a brother of theirs. How you would like to have them as brothers of you.
I would always love to have a brother in faith, to have someone glean off of as they would glean off of me. Here you've seen us talk amongst ourselves.